Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer on how a banned, practically bankrupt spectacle completely transformed into a global multi-billion-dollar streaming juggernaut. I mean, we are looking at a story of absolute extremes here. On one hand, you've got this fringe martial arts experiment that was practically forced underground by politicians. And on the exact opposite end, you have one of the most lucrative, truly revolutionary media rights deals in the history of live sports. The UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, has charted a corporate and cultural path that is just unlike anything else out there. And today, we're going to map out exactly how they managed to pull the whole thing off. To kick things off, take a moment to process this staggering $7.7 billion figure. That represents the absolute blockbuster media rights deal announced between Paramount and TKO Group Holdings. Back in August of 2025, the sports and entertainment world was literally shaken when Paramount stepped up to become the exclusive U.S. home for all UFC events. That $7.7 billion is broken down over a 7-year term, giving it an unbelievable average annual value of $1.1 billion. To really put that into perspective, the UFC's previous domestic media rights agreement was valued at $1.5 billion over 5 years. So this new deal, it's an astronomical leap. It officially cements the UFC as a premier, platinum-tier global sports asset. So the absolutely crucial point here is that starting in 2026, the UFC is abandoning its long-standing pay-per-view model entirely. They'll be streaming all premium events exclusively on Paramount Plus at no extra cost to subscribers. Seriously, this is an absolute earthquake for the industry. For decades, right, the UFC's entire financial foundation was built on convincing fans to pay a hefty premium, a la carte fee for its biggest monthly numbered events. Under this new strategy, they're just leaving that model in the dust. They are prioritizing mass accessibility and discoverability over individual event sales. For the expansive U.S. subscriber base of Paramount Plus, this means unlocking the sport's most premium content without jumping over that traditional paywall. It's a move clearly designed to act as a massive catalyst for engagement and subscriber growth for the streaming platform. But to truly appreciate the sheer magnitude of this corporate broadcasting victory, we really have to rewind to 1993 to see how this sport started as a gritty, chaotic experiment. Section 1. Origins, the No Rules Era. Back at UFC 1 in Denver, Colorado, the founders basically pitched the event as a real-life fighting video game tournament. The whole idea started simply just to see if a wrestler could beat a boxer. They literally threw kickboxers, sumo wrestlers, shoot fighters, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners into an 8-sided cage called the octagon. The whole point was to identify the most effective martial art with, well, minimal rules. But, as you might guess, that initial no-holds-barred approach definitely caught the attention of politicians, which led to sweeping bans across the country by 1996. It actually wasn't until 2001, when the company was bought for just $2 million, that things began to shift, eventually paving the way for a massive $4 billion sale in 2016. So, to survive being forced totally underground, the UFC had to undergo a massive evolution. They had to shed their incredibly violent early image and adopt really strict rules, things like mandatory gloves and weight classes. I mean, in the early days, you had crazy scenarios where a fighter could face an opponent with a 9-inch height advantage and a 400-pound weight advantage. It was literally marketed with the tagline, "There are no rules." But to get back on pay-per-view and actually appease state athletic commissions, they worked hard to rebrand from a wild spectacle to a legitimate sport. They banned fishhooking, headbutting, and kicks to the head of a downed opponent. They brought in 5-minute rounds. And by doing all of this, they were finally able to get sanctioned in key states like New Jersey and Nevada. That really set the stage for their corporate rebirth. Which brings us to Section 2, banned, bankrupt, and bought. So get this. In 2001, the Fertitta brothers bought the entire battered UFC franchise for a mere $2 million. They basically acquired barely more than a wooden octagon and the brand name. When casino executives Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta, along with their business partner Dana White, approached the original owners, the UFC was literally standing on the brink of folding. When they bought it, Lorenzo's attorneys actually told him he was out of his mind because there were virtually no tangible assets. But Lorenzo understood that he was buying the brand, those 3 letters, UFC. So they formed a parent entity called Zuffa and set straight to work, leaning on their ties to the Nevada State Athletic Commission to secure sanctioning and desperately try to get the brand back on cable television. Section 3. The Reality TV Savior. Okay, so even after that buyout, the losses just kept piling up. We're talking $34 million in the hole.
Faced with the very real prospect of going entirely out of business, they threw a final, desperate Hail Mary. They stepped completely outside their core pay-per-view model, paying $10 million of their own money to put fighters on free cable television. By 2004, despite having some successful live events, Zuffa was just bleeding cash. So they developed this concept for The Ultimate Fighter. They pitched the reality show to several networks, right? And every single one rejected it. No way. So they went to Spike TV and offered to completely fund the production costs themselves. It was an incredibly risky do-or-die bet to showcase the actual personalities and the brutal training behind the fighters, hoping, just hoping, it would finally connect with a mainstream audience.
And man, did that gamble pay off. The live finale of that first season resulted in a legendary, all-out brawl that hooked millions, saving the company from total collapse literally overnight. In 2005, following WWE Raw, the show debuted and was just an instant hit. But it was that live finale between Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar that changed everything. The two light heavyweights went toe-to-toe in an absolute war for the six-figure contract, and it drew a massive 1.9 overall rating on Spike TV. Dana White himself credits this exact specific moment for saving the UFC. In fact, the momentum was so incredibly intense that the contract for Season 2 was reportedly negotiated and scribbled down on a literal napkin outside the venue immediately after the fight. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. From there, pay-per-view buys just exploded, and the modern era of the UFC was officially born.
Section 4. The Paramount Empire.
Now, this part is just wildly ironic. Back in the 1990s, a U.S. senator actively campaigned to ban the sport entirely in all 50 states, using the exact phrase, human cockfighting. When Senator John McCain saw a tape of the early UFC events, he found it completely abhorrent. He sent letters to governors all across the country, which actually led to 36 states enacting laws to ban no-holds-barred fighting. It forced the UFC into smaller, rural markets and completely pushed them off major pay-per-view platforms. This quote perfectly represents the deepest point of exile for the UFC, a time when the mainstream establishment wanted absolutely nothing to do with them and actively tried to legislate them out of existence.
But fast forward to today and listen to this direct contrast. The CEO of a premier American television network is now out here praising that very same property as a cultural cornerstone. David Ellison actually goes on to highlight the UFC's extraordinary global recognition, scale, and cultural impact. Think about that. The same exact property that was once smeared as human cockfighting is now recognized by a major media conglomerate as a year-round, must-watch driver of engagement and long-term viewer loyalty. The UFC's leadership, Dana White, along with TKO executives Ari Emanuel, Mark Shapiro, managed to take a totally exiled brand and build it into a property so incredibly valuable that it completely transforms the strategy of a streaming giant like Paramount+.
Okay, let's dive right into the specifics of this new empire. We're talking 43 annual live events moving directly to your streaming devices, completely bypassing those traditional, super expensive pay-per-view fees that fans have been shelling out for decades. Just look at the sheer scale of the operation here. Paramount is securing 13 marquee-numbered events and 30 fight nights every single year. Plus, select marquee fights will actually be simulcast on CBS, bringing the sport right back to premier broadcast network television. For TKO investors, the economics here are just massive. The deal is heavily weighted toward the back end of the 7 years, giving them guaranteed long-term financial stability. For global brand partners, it vastly expands premium inventory, and for the athletes and the fans, it creates a highly visible, incredibly accessible new global stage. So, the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves to wrap up this explainer is this. As the UFC unlocks total access for its 100 million US fans, will the rest of the live sports world be forced to follow them into the streaming age? I mean, the UFC has nearly 1 billion broadcast and digital households across the globe, and they just made their absolute most premium product available at no extra cost to subscribers of a major streaming service. It is a radical departure from the status quo. From a $2 million Hail Mary gamble with basically no assets to a $7.7 billion streaming empire, the UFC has honestly never been afraid to rewrite the rules. The only question left now is, how is the rest of the sports world going to respond?